A few years ago, I ran into a super interesting car museum in a pretty unlikely place. At the northern edge of Fairbanks, Alaska, there is an automobile museum that has a collection entirely made up of pre-World War II American-made cars. Ford, Chrysler, Cadillac, but also dozens of cars from companies that went out of business almost a century ago. Auburn, Oakland, Stutz, Cord, Duesenberg. 100 years ago, anybody could start a car company in the United States. There were dozens of them sprouting up all the time. A few years later, there were 3. And for the rest of the 20th century, it was basically impossible to start a car company. Almost nobody even tried. And then, at the beginning of the 21st century, once again, anybody could start a car company. And anybody did. Coda, Lucid, Aptera, Canoo, Faraday, Lordstown, Nikola, Fisker, Fisker again, Apple, allegedly. There was a frenzy of new car companies in the early 20th century, and almost none of them survived. There was an EV company frenzy 100 years later, and almost none of those companies made any real number of cars before fizzling out. Some of them didn't make any cars. Rivian also never made any cars, but they have made a lot of trucks and SUVs. Actually, they did make one car, kind of. Rivian started out with a plan of making a mid-engine hybrid sports car. One prototype was made. It was around this time that the EV company boom started. Tesla, Fisker, Aptera, Coda, there was excitement and there was venture capital money. Rivian got in on the action, securing investments and buying a shuttered Mitsubishi plant in Normal, Illinois. A couple of years later, the R1T and R1S debuted. And over the next few years, the company expanded hiring and ramped up engineering and manufacturing to begin production of the vehicles in mid-2021. Production was delayed by a global chip shortage, but in October of that year, Rivian began delivering the first ever electric production pickup trucks to customers. A few weeks later, the company IPO'd, and in the first day, the valuation reached $90 billion. More than Ford, more than GM. Things were seemingly going really well. But it turns out mass-producing cars profitably is pretty hard. The company was selling cars for less than it cost them to make by a lot. Rivian increased prices, which came with some backlash from reservation holders. Reports of reliability problems put Rivian near the bottom of the list. Several top executives left the company, and the stock plummeted. And so changes were made. The R1 got a huge upgrade and version 2 was released in June of 2024. Visually, almost nothing changed, but under the skin, everything changed. The suspension was new, the HVAC system was completely redesigned, the whole electrical system was reconfigured, reducing chips, controllers, and over a mile of wiring. From the customer's perspective, the vehicle was better, it was quieter, had better ride quality, it had some convenience upgrades, but from Rivian's perspective, it was way better. The cost to produce the vehicles dropped dramatically with fewer components, less costly components, and simpler manufacturing. Rivian is in a better financial place now, but the company is still losing money. The partnership with Volkswagen is generating income, and previous regulatory credit sales to other automakers have resulted in overall gross profit. But Rivian has never been net profitable. The company has reported multi-billion-dollar losses every year since it went public. The company is at a make-or-break moment, and they are betting all of their chips on one thing. Rivian recently launched their second-generation vehicle, the R2. Shipments to customers have already begun. I think the R1 is a pretty great vehicle, and I'm optimistic about R2. In fact, I have a deposit on the R2. I reached out to Rivian and asked if I could be a part of any media drive events they have, and they kindly obliged. This video is not sponsored or otherwise supported by Rivian, and they have no input on what I say. The R2, in a lot of ways, is a scaled-down R1S. It has the same basic shape, same design language, same materials, and this is probably a good strategy because even when Rivian was scoring dead last in reliability, they were first in customer satisfaction. Rivian owners really like their Rivians. The R2 looks way smaller parked next to an R1, but inside it is shockingly big. It almost feels impossibly big inside. My 4Runner is 9 inches longer and 5 inches wider, and it feels like the R2 has way more interior space. I don't know how they did this, but color me impressed. The headlight design can be a bit polarizing, and I'll admit that the front is not my favorite angle, but I do think it looks good overall. It's a clean, simple design with a pretty basic shape and some more interesting designs in some areas. The interior looks great, simple enough with some fantastic uses of materials. There are very few physical buttons and none on the dash. I usually hate this, but Rivian did a pretty good job with it. All the important stuff is perpetually at the bottom or side of the screen, and the steering wheel has 2 control wheels. The stalks behind the wheels do the reverse neutral drive shift and some other common controls. The rollers on the steering wheel do volume and some other things. They're pretty neat. The feedback is based on what you're controlling, so it'll click down until you hit 0 on volume, and then it has a spring bottom. You can also push them back or forward with your thumbs for other controls, though it does take some getting used to. My main complaint with these wheels, and actually most people's, is that it's hard to push them without also scrolling. The engineering on this thing is cool, the use of it is a little bit clunky. I hope they can clean it up with some software. The other thing I don't like is the glass roof. The R1 has an electrochromic roof that can act as a shade, but the R2 does not, and it needs something on a hot day. But overall, the R2 is surprisingly good, and surprisingly good at a lot of different things. Good road handling, sporty driving, off-road capability, towing, hauling things. As with any dual-motor EV, the acceleration is impressive, and it is surprisingly capable and fun in the curves, especially considering that it has over 9.5 inches of ground clearance. You can tell Rivian did a decent amount of off-road tuning on the powertrain and brakes. It's great at transferring the power around, preventing too much slip, and getting power where it's useful. The ground clearance and approach and departure angles are excellent for off-roading. There are no locking diffs, and it's not as capable as the R1, so if you're looking for a dedicated off-roader, this is probably not it. I'd put its off-road capability at the high end of crossover SUVs, somewhere near a Subaru Forester or a Jeep Cherokee. You can tow 4,400 pounds with it, and with the front seats all the way forward, I could lie down in the back of it. The battery pack is a structural member of the floor. It takes a lot of the crash loads. The battery cells are larger, so there are now 768 cells, down from over 10 times as many in the R1. This means there are fewer parts inside the battery connecting and cooling the cells. Rivian switched the cell chemistry to high nickel NCMA. This results in a smaller and lighter weight battery than the previously used chemistries. It cost a little more, but the company seems to be prioritizing packaging and weight, which results in more space and better vehicle performance. And range. Range is pretty good. Rivian has a reputation of being accurate with their range estimates, more so than most other EV companies. There are little aerodynamic tricks here and there, and the front motor will disconnect from the front wheels to improve range when it isn't needed. You get the sense being around the R2 that everyone involved was working towards the same goal. They were all building the same vehicle. This seems like an obvious strategy, but it's rarer than you think, and it's pretty hard to do. It all comes together in a package that does kind of a lot of things really well. The only trim available right now is the Performance with the launch package for about $60,000. Other trims will be added later, with a lower cost version coming out sometime around summer 2027, starting around $45,000. There are hints and rumors of a tri-motor version and an R2X off-road focus trim, and probably a few other interesting things. The R2 is really good. It's not perfect, but it's good in all of the ways that are important. But that's not the only thing that will keep the company out of the graveyard. They have to actually make profit on this car, and I get the sense that they've figured out how to do that. Remember how I said the engineers removed over a mile of wire when they did the second version of the R1? That is represented by this ball of copper. They did about the same amount of reduction again for the R2. There's a lot of in-house design and manufacturing that's allowed them to do things like consolidate several components into one assembly. That reduces wiring, cooling, connectors, manufacturing assembly time. Another thing Rivian needs to get right is reliability. You can't keep coming in dead last in reliability. It'll kill the brand, and the cost of fixing problems will chew into the profits. The things the company has done to simplify manufacturing will help reliability. Fewer parts is fewer failure points, but reliability is deceptively hard, and it's one of the things that even century-old companies struggle with. How the R2 fares in this respect will be a big indicator for the future of the company. Rivian is also betting big on autonomy, and that's another area they need to get right. The hands-free driving was very good during my limited use, but there are too many people making big autonomy promises for me to believe anything until I see it. So we'll just have to wait and see. Rivian has seemingly struggled for as long as they've been around. They're in the news for layoffs averaging every 6 months. They're still raising capital and spending more money than they make. There is no shortage of news stories about the decline of EV sales. We are apparently in a downturn. Companies are canceling electric vehicles and cutting back on their EV programs, losing billions of dollars. But EV sales are not notably declining. The EV market share is increasing in almost every country. There's been a dip in the US, partly due to the fact that there was a burst of people buying just before the tax credit went away, but the market is still pretty strong. There have been companies struggling to sell electric vehicles, but here's the deal. There are a lot of bad EVs. Those are the ones that people are not buying. And the R2 is certainly not a bad EV. That's what makes Rivian different. Their vehicles are all really good. Some people will buy an EV because they feel like it's the right thing to do, but most people won't. Most people will only buy an EV if it's better than the combustion alternative. And the R2 is better than most competing combustion alternatives. There were dozens of electric vehicle startups in the United States at the beginning of this century, and there are 3 left. The ones that didn't survive, they mostly made bad vehicles. There are pre-production companies, but Aptera is not going to make it, and as much as I'd like to see Tello and Slate be successful, I just don't see how they can make a sustainable profit. I hope to be proven wrong, but I don't have a lot of faith. I've worked for 3 electric vehicle companies in my career. 2 of them were failures despite lots of money and lots of hard work by smart people. Tesla is doing fine. Well, they're doing something. I don't know exactly what it is, but they're not going out of business anytime soon. I think we're going to have one more survivor. I think Rivian will make it. I hope they do, because they make pretty great vehicles. In 50 years, there will probably be a museum dedicated to the electric vehicles of the early 21st century, and among the Fiskars and Kodas and Lucids, there will be a Rivian in that museum. And I think there will also be some Rivians in the parking lot. I think Rivian is going to do just fine. It's hard to know exactly what's going on inside a company because the news tends to focus on the negative or the sensational. There's always a bias in the news you read, whether or not the outlet intends it, it's there. That's why it's nice to have tools that cut through the bias. Tools like today's sponsor, Ground News. Ground News gathers over 50,000 news sources every day and distills it down in a way that makes it much easier to get the actual story. Take a look at this story on Elon Musk's recent interview with The Economist. It has 34 sources, with 7 coming from the left and 20 from the right. You can see the split of how many sources are from media conglomerates versus independent news sources. You can see at a quick glance that the left-leaning sources are focusing on Musk's responses, and the right-leaning sources are implying a bias in the interviewer's questions. There's often a very different focus coming from the left and right side. Often you won't even see one side report on a story. Ground News has an awesome feature called Blind Spot that can help you break out of your echo chamber by showing you stories disproportionately reported by one side. Ground News is a great tool that strips away the biases, the outrage, and the veiled opinions that permeate the news. Go to ground.news/superfastmatt to subscribe through my link for 40% off unlimited access with their Vantage plan, the same plan I use. By subscribing, you are directly supporting an independent platform on a mission to restore facts, transparency, and trust in the news.